Go? Excellent. Welcome to Overly Critical or Hostile Understanding Bullying and Negative Acts in the Academic Library Environment and Solutions to Improve the Work Environment, brought to you by the ACRL University Libraries Section's Professional Development Committee. We're so delighted to have you and our presenters here today. I am Colleen Quinn. I am the co-chair of this committee. I will be moderating this program along with my co-chair, Jane Hammonds, and fellow committee member, Jason Cruz. This is one of an ongoing series of online programs sponsored by our committee. I will go ahead and pop a link to our programs. Before I introduce our presenters, a few logistics. This session is being recorded, and we will send the link of the video, slides, and any other supplemental documentation to everyone who registered for the program. Please note that we are not able to share the chat transcript due to privacy reasons, but we will be sure to share any links or questions we receive in the chat along with the webinar recording. The program will run for an hour total, including time for questions. Please feel free to add questions into the chat box throughout the presentation at any time. Jane and Jason will be collating them and will be prepared to read them to today's presenters. As you use the chat feature, please make sure you send your message to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see what you're asking. We will post a link to a brief evaluation in the chat box after the Q&A session. Please take a moment to give us your feedback on today's program. It looks like that link I shared is not working. I'll make sure I resolve that. So, with those announcements out of the way, I'm very happy to start today's program, Overly Critical or Hostile, Understanding Bullying and Negative Acts in the Academic Library Environment, and Solutions to Improve the Work Environment. I'll briefly introduce our two presenters, and they can more fully introduce themselves as they see fit. First, we have Rachel Keiko Stark, and she is the Health Sciences Librarian for Sacramento State University. We also have Maggie Albro. She is the Agricultural and Natural Resources Librarian and Interim Assistant Head of the library's Health, Wellness, and Professional Programs Unit for the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And without further delay, I will hand it over to our panelists.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. As mentioned, we are here to discuss bullying and negative acts in the academic workplace. As a background on us and as to why we're here, we're going to go a little bit further into our definitions. We're going to talk a lot about what we've done. And we want to be very honest with y'all, like we are trying to create an evidence-based intervention. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to discuss our learning outcomes for today. We're going to provide y'all with some shared vocabulary. We're going to talk about what bullying and civility research in academic libraries look like. And then we're going to discuss effective techniques for identifying and stopping what we call lateral violence in the workplace. And throughout this presentation, we are going to use the term lateral violence to describe violence between librarians, which is where the focus of our research is. But this can also be known as bullying, and there's some other terms that we will get to later on in the presentation. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So I'm sure everyone who is in this presentation is aware that bullying and negative acts are a problem in the workplace in academic libraries. However, while this has been documented for a good number of years, it is not well defined and it is not well addressed in our literature. And this is specifically true if, like Maggie and myself, you're really into evidence-based decision-making and evidence-based practice. There is pretty much no high quality evidence on effective techniques for addressing this in our profession. So our goal is to provide some definitions and discuss how the evidence that we have found can help you navigate a negative workplace and hopefully address and or negate some of the bullying that you or your colleagues might experience in an academic library workplace. So let's go over our agenda real quick, just so y'all know. Again, we're doing that overview, which hopefully will take just a couple minutes since we covered most of it. We're going to go into definitions, structures, navigation, and then we're going to talk about the Mollusk project, which is a project Maggie and I have been creating and running for quite some time and try to convince y'all to participate so we can collect some of this much needed evidence. All right, so let's get into our overview. So, full disclosure, both Maggie and I have firsthand experience with bullying and negative acts in the workplace. This entire project has come forward because we wanted more tools with how to deal with our experiences, and we wanted to understand what evidence said we could do to improve our own outcomes and hopefully the outcomes of our colleagues and friends. Um, we understand and we hope that this background information will be helpful. We know it is well documented in the published research that bullying has a known impact on not only your work performance, but on your physical, mental health, and your ability to create, form, and maintain social relationships. The mental and physical toll of bullying has been documented to last months and years, much beyond the duration of the behavior. And in more recent publications, there's been indication that 46% of librarians across all types of libraries have experienced bullying and negative acts at work. Now, I do want to be clear, this is a hard thing to get documentation on, so it's possible that number is higher than what we have presented. While bullying has been discussed in the literature, if you do a quick scan of the literature or a quick search, I'm sure you'll notice most of it is things like, oh, does bullying exist? The answer to that is yes. Yes, it does exist. And also, here's an example of how we might want to address bullying, but again, there's no real evidence on what's effective. And because libraries exist in a very hierarchical structure, there's going to be some things that we need to consider that quite frankly, are not discussed in a lot of these one off opinion or personal experience pieces. So we wanted to try to find some actual evidence and we failed. So we thought, okay, well, where else can we go? Nursing. Now, I am biased as a health sciences librarian because I've worked with nurses for a very long time and because I do a lot of research with nursing faculty and work with nursing students. But nursing documentation on not only bullying in a female dominated profession, similar to libraries, but also effective interventions is very good. So we wanted to take an idea of what information is available in this similar field and incorporate it into what we hope will be an evidence-based intervention for librarians, hence the Mollusk Project. We also want to be very aware that librarians and nurses, of course, we have very different approaches to our work and we expect to do different things, but we are a service oriented industry. And similarly to most librarians, nurses also have to deal both with bullying between nurses and between nurses and the people they serve, in this case, their patients, as well as, and this is probably a little more prevalent in the academic background, the hierarchical bullying that you'll often see in a medical background. For example, bullying between doctors and nurses, which I personally would postulate could be similar in experience to the bullying that those of us who are librarian faculty might experience from instructional faculty. A devaluation of profession, a lot of the issues that come up with a feminization of the profession, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this is to say that since we didn't have any librarian research, we said, you know what, we're going to use the stuff that nurses have come up with, and we're going to move forward with that. And yes, there is going to be a link to the pre-post survey and to our entire project at the end of this presentation. Thank you so much. So we're going to start with some definitions. And there's a reason why definitions are so important and the reason why we keep saying this. And that's because we need to develop a shared vocabulary. We understand from the research, not only in nursing, but in bullying research in general, that having a shared vocabulary creates a shared understanding of what actions mean. Right now, we all have very specific individual experiences, very specific backgrounds, and very specific beliefs that inform our understanding and experiences of the world. Without a shared vocabulary, there are no expectations for what is appropriate for the specific workplace. So, by creating a shared vocabulary, not only with definitions, but also examples, the goal is to give libraries, specifically in this case, academic libraries, words to use to describe not only what is happening, but what can be done as a way to negate or intervene when we see these negative acts. So again, For this specific presentation, we are focusing on bullying and incivil behavior between library employees, even more specifically, between librarians. While we understand and respect that there is a growing body of research about bullying between librarians and library staff, this is beyond the scope of this presentation, although we highly encourage other people to consider researching that, of course. And there is also a long and growing body of research on bullying, incivility, and violence inflicted on librarians by library users and library patrons. We highly encourage this. This is an area that deserves more information and more research done on it. And hopefully in the future, someday we can tackle that as well. But because we want this to be evidence-based, we want to make sure we're focused. Maggie, did you want to pop in?
I was just going to add to that. There are so many different opportunities for bullying, negative acts in so many different scenarios within library because employment classes and positions are so different. Our user populations are so different that it's kind of impossible to find a solution for everything all at once. So we're tackling, starting with the areas that we work in and are most familiar with. But we are hoping to kind of expand, partner with others who have experience in different areas, and kind of build the understanding and the evidence and the knowledge around all those different types of interactions. So I really appreciate folks pointing out the more flat environmental structures, the different types of employment. All of these are factors that are really critical to consider when looking at your environment. But for the sake of gathering evidence, you gotta scope it somewhere before you snowball out. But we'd really love for y'all to also help us contribute to this research and like make our libraries a better place.
Thank you so much, Maggie. Yes, once again, our goal is to collect y'all's data and to use that to create an evidence-based approach specific to academic libraries. And the more information we have, the better that can be. So thank you to everyone who's interested. There will be links available to you, and we really appreciate everyone's participation. The project eventually hopes to expand. Right now, we're looking at starting public librarian specific modules and research, and hopefully we'll be able to expand beyond that soon. All right, so let's get a little bit more into some definitions. Now, everybody has a bad day, and sometimes when we have a bad day, we do bad things. The whole hurt people, definitely true. So that can be a negative act that you do in the workplace. I know we're all guilty of it. I am. Like, I can get real snappy. I have no problem admitting that. And then I can become incivil. So this is when one person inflicts a negative act or does a negative behavior to someone else for a short period of time. It might be something that's rude, discourteous. It can be intentional or it can be unintentional, but it is oftentimes habitual of the person inflicting it. And it can be practiced selectively in violation of the norms of respect. And again, that's going back to this concept of shared vocabulary. If we don't have definitions in our workplace that define what respect is, or that define preferred behaviors in the workplace, then we can't really understand or create boundaries that are healthy for everybody in the workplace so that we can identify what's an incivil versus a bullying act. Now, bullying is specifically defined as having a time component. I can have a bad day and I can slam the door in someone's face. That's very mean of me and I shouldn't do that. But it happens. Now, if I keep doing that to the same person over 6 months to a year, I'm bullying that person, and that's definitely a me problem, and I got to stop that. So, bullying has a consistency, again, typically defined in the research as 6 months, and it is also specifically escalating over time. So, I might go from slamming the door in some poor person's face to stealing stuff off their desk. It's the escalation part and the consistency part that are important to understand for bullying here. Again, a power differential can sometimes come in as well. So when I have a negative act towards someone, for example, I just received tenure, if I'm having negative acts towards members of my department who don't have tenure, that's going to have a different impact on them than if I'm doing to someone who's at the same level as me, or if I'm trying to slam the door in the face of someone who has reached full professor status. Um, Again, when we're describing this term, we also use workplace violence, lateral violence, and horizontal violence. Lateral violence and horizontal violence tend to come from the nursing research, which is where we base most of our information on. Now, There is a term called mobbing, which describes when than two or more individuals participate in inflicting a negative behavior on someone else. This is not often described in the literature based in the United States. If anyone wants to research this, please go ahead. It'd be great to get more than one article on this in academic libraries, and I think it could be very helpful. But because it's not very well researched in the United States, we generally do not spend a lot of time on this in our own research. Again, if more people produce stuff, we'll definitely include it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the types of bullying now that we have an understanding of what bullying is. So this is a short list of the various types of bullying. So we have physical bullying, which is a physical target. We have verbal bullying, which is when you use words. And just so we all understand, sticks and stones might break your bones, but words will definitely hurt you. And then we also have cyberbullying, which takes place over digital devices and in digital areas. And we are starting to see an increase in research on this, which is sad, but also very interesting. And we have social bullying, which can be something that is heavily influenced not only by the feminization of our profession, but also by the academic environment. And that's where someone tries to harm the other person's relationships and our reputation. And this can be extremely difficult, especially when you have a tenure-based environment. So let's go ahead and talk about what some of these examples look like. Again, this is a very abbreviated list, so just be aware that there's lots of other examples, which if you complete our mollusk project examples, you will find some more of. Now, for physical bullying, we have the traditional grabbing someone, pushing someone, but there's also less direct examples of physical bullying, such as leaning over someone, looming over someone, staring at someone real hard. You also have examples of verbal bullying, such as name calling, being antagonizing in your speech, and rude speech. And you can see where the verbal bullying can really benefit from having that shared vocabulary and that shared understanding. Because what I might think is antagonizing or rude speech might not reflect what someone else does. So, again, going back to looking at different definitions and how that can change people's experience. That's why we emphasize developing that shared vocabulary for your specific workplace. So cyberbullying, that's kind of, are we going back, Maggie? Oop, you're muted, Fen. Oh no! Okay, sorry. Sorry, y'all. Technical difficulties. Okay, so cyberbullying can involve things like threatening messages. It can be doxing someone, posting rude images, making consistently negative comments in someone's virtual feeds. And this, again, is a growing area of research. So hopefully we'll have more examples. Well, ideally, we would never have examples of this, but realistically, we will. And when that happens, we'll be able to update that. So doxing is when you put out someone's personal information on an online form. This tends to be something more along the lines of, oh, we don't like this person, so we're going to post their address, their phone number, their email, and then you encourage people to basically threaten them in various ways. A more extreme version of doxing might be swatting, where you call the police on someone based on their address. Yeah, it's not fun. And then, of course, we also have social bullying. So this is withholding information from someone. So maybe they're late to a meeting or taking credit for someone's work, which is one of my most hated, and also encouraging others to bully someone. And this is where social dynamics can come in. And again, a lot of the hierarchical nature that we see specifically in academic environments. All right, so let's talk a little bit about types of intervention now that we have an idea of the different types of bullying. As Maggie mentioned, there is no one shoe fits everybody approach to this. There is going to be a multi-pronged approach that we recommend, again, based on the research. The first one is going to be a culture change. A culture change. This is the deliberate effort to transform, evolve, or grow the core values, beliefs, and attitudes, and of course, also practices and behaviors of all levels of the library. And if you can't get that buy-in, quite frankly, it's going to be very, very difficult for the culture to change. So it can't just be just the librarians are doing this. It needs to have support from above, and it needs to have support from people within all levels of the organization. An example of this might be the creation of anti-bully policies, but we also strongly recommend the creation of anti-bullying policies, because again, it defines that shared language, it sets expectations, it sets boundaries. Without having that documentation, it can be very difficult to create that climate change or to create that culture change and to create a shared understanding. We also believe that bystander interventions are a good option. This has been showing to be extremely effective in the nursing research, not only for horizontal and lateral violence, but also for bullying in the situation where it might be a patron of the library who is bullying a librarian. We haven't tested that yet, but we'll get there someday. But we want to encourage people to consider a bystander intervention, which right now is what the Mollusk Project offers a lot of information on and training on, which is where people are given the tools to identify bullying and are given specific scripts to address bullying. Because as y'all know, when we get into a stress situation, sometimes it can be hard to stop and think and come up with our own. So if you have a script and you have it with you, it's a lot easier to stop and intervene when you see a negative act occurring. And of course, training and education. Now, we do recommend finding high quality, and by that we mean evidence-based. Without the evidence, how effective can it truly be? And again, that's why we are pushing the Mollusk Project so that we can get some of that data. And we do want to make sure that people choose something appropriate for their organization and or specific to their department, because there are going to be unique approaches and unique needs that represent um, different challenges or different approaches that might be needed based on the individuals that compose the department. All right, so next, Maggie's going to take over and talk about some of these structures. Thank you, everyone.
Alrighty, let's see if I can control the slides properly now. Um, all right, so within academic libraries, which is what we are focusing on, structure, whether it's flat, whether it's stacked, it varies widely, but it's really a thing. And within academic libraries, we have like compounding levels of structure that make it really easy for power to be a thing, and where there's power, there's the potential for abuse. So there's, like I said, multiple levels of hierarchy inherent in an academic library. There is that faculty versus staff divide, like we mentioned before, where in some libraries that's really wide, and that's some like times stressful, other times faculty and staff are more chill. It varies, right? There's different structures of ranks and classifications, sometimes among staff, among faculty, among everybody. There's your state classification versus your classification in your university versus whatever else. And then there's also whatever administrative organizational structure you've got going on within your library that maybe you're all technically, like assistant librarian, but some people are in management or scaffolded in ways that gives them power. These scaffolded dynamics are super common in higher ed, as well as nursing, which is again why we pulled from the nurses. And it makes it easy for that top-down vertical violence to occur. And that's kind of well known, but where there's vertical violence, that's kind of communicating an acceptability of uncivil behavior, which means horizontal lateral violence, bullying, is going to be perceived as more acceptable unless it's explicitly communicated that it's not. We will also note that interpersonal friction is a thing in all workplaces. Not liking somebody is different than being bullied by them. But in libraries, we have kind of a common set of beliefs and values within the library culture that can make this friction a little rougher. We tend as a profession to suffer from vocational awe, that belief that, there is an inherent moral goodness to our work, and that self-sacrifice and perhaps negative interactions or conditions are, like the burden of that is worth it. And so we tend not to speak up. We tend to tolerate more things. Our backgrounds, beliefs, personalities do vary. We may not be the most diverse profession, but we work with a lot of people who come from a wide array of backgrounds. And then collegiality and congeniality frequently get confused. So collegiality is working around those shared workplace norms where we all have an underlying respect for each other, whether or not we like each other. And in libraries, we tend to conflate congeniality, so perkiness, friendliness, a willingness to be socially like approachable at all times and friendly as a basis for congeniality when that is not the norm in a lot of workplaces where you can be kind. Yeah, there's a difference between being nice and being kind. There is a difference between being disrespectful and not liking somebody. And so it's that line that we have to walk a lot. And in libraries, if somebody is not a bubbly or overwhelmingly like approachable person, they tend to get automatically clumped as incivil, whether or not their behavior actually is, just based on how we tend to be in our profession. And so again, setting up those shared vocabulary and norms is really important for like building understanding as an org. But in general, when there is a built-in structure of subordination in an organization, there is potential for abuse. And we all like to think we would never be the person abusing power. If you put me in charge for one day, I would fix it all and it would all be bubbly, right? Like how many times have you heard somebody say like something like that? Um, so we have to work as a community to make sure that abuse is not tolerated or even accidentally creeping in. And so that brings us to navigating this, right? Because even in our conversation here in the chat, we're noting some of the big differences that get in the way of navigating bullying and incivility. Is it just that they're not bubbly or are they being mean to me? Was that a one-off thing? And like, we often want to assume the best, sometimes we want to assume the worst, but it makes it difficult um, to navigate. And there is so much overlap, right? Rudeness and negative acts and civility all the way down to bullying, mobbing, harassment. There's a number of different factors at play here. If I were to just continually, while racial talks keep just changing the slide, do it once or twice because I'm clumsy with my mouth or I misunderstood where she was in her talking. Okay, that's a little rude, but you know, that's like accidents happen. I do it every single time she opens her mouth, then there's a pattern and there's a time component, and I'm being intentional at that point. Um, so tons of overlap in this. So we kind of have to piece together, we've oversimplified 5-ish factors to give us an idea of like, is this a pattern? Is this a culture thing? Or is somebody having a bad day? So we've got our 4 formats we talked about physical, verbal, social, cyber. We can think about, is this happening in just one of those contexts? Is it happening in multiple? Like, how is this being done and is it being done repeatedly? What type of behavior is it? Is it, you know, somebody's backstabbing, somebody's using weird body language, somebody's blabbing your personal information to the whole library? So what type of behavior is it? Could it easily have been an accident? Is it multiple types of behavior? Rachel mentioned the escalation component of this. Escalation does not necessarily have to mean I go from glaring at you to like pushing you on the floor. It could mean I start glaring and then I start withholding some information maybe. And then I undermine your work a bit, right? Like on the surface, those all seem it, and you know, if they were happen to me on a one-off, I'd put them all in a very similar like category. One might not be worse than the other, but the fact that the number of behaviors, the types of behavior is growing in variety can be seen as an escalation. We look at our number of perpetrators. Is it one person? Is it more than one? And that usually is going to tell you whether mobbing is happening, right? If there's more than one and the other pieces fit, you're probably in the mobbing territory. And then the number of victims. Are you the only one? Are there a couple of you? Is it your team? Is it one person who does this to literally everybody in the library? Can help you figure out what's going on, because maybe this person does it to literally everybody. And so, it's a pattern, but the approach to how you resolve that is likely going to involve like some civility training or intervention that is different than if they are singling out an individual for bullying. Sometimes it's going to be the same. Sometimes we're going to work off this bystander intervention, shared culture. But that can help you kind of figure out like how you approach navigating things. And then that time and duration piece. Was this a single event? Did I forget to drink my coffee this morning and ignore your hello because I was not caffeinated? Or do I pointedly ignore your hello every morning and say hello to everybody else? Right? So these different context pieces. And bullying can happen, it might happen every now and then, and it still continues. It might happen daily. Intensity while growing and over time matters. But a lot of this, you have to kind of stack the pieces to assess the situation. And you're going to hate that I'm about to leave the slide without a definitive answer of what combination marks what level. Bullying is also about impact, right? So sometimes incivility might be intentional. Negative acts are definitely intentional, but incivility is sometimes an accident. Sometimes we're rude and we don't mean to be. Bullying is, there is intent, and it may not be conscious intent. It may be, I don't like this person, so I'm going to be difficult with them, but that is still intent, right? So these pieces can help you kind of think deeper about what's going on to help you navigate and feel more comfortable addressing or advocating things. If any of you are like me, you love to overthink. So these are just some areas to prompt your thoughts. So once you've had your thoughts and collected them, what are you going to do? Speak up. Use assertive communication. We've on our tools, we've got some tools for defining assertive communication, practicing assertive communication among yourself. We've even got a little like printout you can attach to your name badge of assertive communication phrases you can use when you're like frozen in a panic, like I tend to do. I'm a fawner and a freezer, not a fighter. I let Rachel fight for me. But we can establish norms in our workplace for how to speak up, or we can speak up on our own. We can report it if you have an anti-bullying policy, or if there is a way of holding people accountable in your organization, make that report, have it on record, even if it is an email to a friendly audience who may not be able to do anything, but you need to build a paper trail. Document, report. And intervene when you can. If you see it happen to someone else, yes, protecting yourself from retaliation is key. If you see it happening to someone else, you can intervene. And intervene doesn't always have to look like, hey, you are bullying and you need to stop it. It could be me going, hey, Rachel, didn't we say we were going to meet to talk about, how we're going to handle this new instruction approach, and pulling Rachel away from that situation. Or, hey, what are you guys talking about? Like inserting yourself in the situation to give someone an out is an intervention. But yeah, so Amy has pointed out in the chat, be careful about speaking up on your own because retaliation is a thing. And it is certainly a risk, and you have to be aware of your willingness to tolerate risk, as well as what mechanisms are in place for protecting you. Rachel, I saw you unmuted. I think you have.
That's also why we recommend that for this to truly be successful, it must be something that at least the department is doing and or the entire structure of however your library is structured. And again, we understand that retaliation is going to help. No one likes to be told you're doing something that is inappropriate or that could be harmful to other people. It's not comfortable to get told when you're bullying someone or that your attitude is inappropriate. So when we approach it as a holistic approach, it is so much more successful. As Maggie mentioned, there are ways to do this without doing that. And we understand, especially based on personal experiences, that sometimes you're never going to get your department to agree to something like this. So having that sort of bond between one or two people can be helpful. So yeah, HR is not your friend, and I will always encourage everyone to remember that HR is there to protect the institution. It's not there to protect you.
Yes,
So
and Ashley has that great recommendation of an ombudsperson. If your ombudsperson is following the guidelines of their profession, they are not allowed to tell anybody what's happening, and can help you navigate your options within what solutions are present in your workplace. So this is part of why we feel this is a conversation that needs to be happening beyond and, if possible, before specific instances happen, right? Because if your institution has an anti-bullying policy, but nobody, yes, they can approach leadership if they get enough of the same report. Thank you, Ashley. If you have an anti-bullying policy, but it goes to HR and HR has like no guideline for retaliation, or it's in the policy that they disclose who reported them, that's something to consider. Whereas if you're just writing the policy, you can write in protections against how things are disclosed or against how they're investigated. So you kind of need to keep an eye on who oversees the policy, who enforces it, what are the consequences, how are they done, and is your administration the type that's actually going to act on this? Yes, not every community college has an ombudsperson. Not every college has an ombudsperson. Some have multiple, some have none. If you do, I know somebody mentioned they're going to be doing a talk on shared governance. Sometimes your shared governance organization might be able to help, not always, but previously I've worked through like Faculty Senate to at least get conversations going about workplace norms or about how things have been resolved by resolved in quotes by administrators that were not satisfactory because of things like mediation that like leaves everybody unhappy. Um, but what's key is identify the resources that are available to you. They might be in your institution, they might be outside. Yeah, like a grievance policy and procedure. Find your safe spaces. If we can do this over the next couple years as a profession, I'd like to think we'd all have more safe spaces. But sometimes your safe space is going to be one friendly colleague. It's going to be the conference room nobody uses where you can just go and like soft scream for a minute to get you through the day. If you believe something is wrong, don't try to talk yourself out of it, right? Like, yes, revisit the factors, assess the situation, but if something in your gut is telling you like, I am being treated poorly, that's not like, don't gaslight yourself. And when it is safe, advocate outside of situations where bullying is happening to establish that bullying will not be accepted if it comes up, and have those conversations in extra spaces. Rachel.
I'd also like to point out that a lot of the examples that have been shared with us over the years that we've been doing that often have like one or two people who are perpetuating a lot of these negative acts. And having a training like the Mollis Project can help bring awareness to that individual that they're creating an issue without having a like come to Jesus moment, because not everybody's ready for that. And it's
Mhm.
also not going to be effective if that person maybe doesn't have a lot of respect and or a lot of confidence in their surrounding librarian colleagues.
Yeah.
So I appreciate all the conversation that's coming on, but I would highly encourage people to remember that it's really difficult to move forward with anything without having that foundation. So having the foundation of a shared understanding of what these definitions are and setting expectations for what is and is not appropriate is going to be critical for any forward movement. It's also going to hopefully give people language that they might not have before. This is particularly important, I think, in multi-generational workplace, which is where a lot of my research focuses on, and also for people for whom English might not be their first language or who come from different cultural backgrounds. All of this can lead to complications that might lead to what someone perceives as negative acts or experiences as negative acts that that other person doesn't realize is negative. A really good example of this is looking someone in the face. For me in my culture, and also as someone who's neurodiverse, like that can be really hard for me. That is not something that I am necessarily comfortable doing. But if people see me staring over their shoulder, then oftentimes they think it's rude. So by having that conversation, I'm able to establish, okay, within the workplace culture, it is okay for me to look people right in the eye. That's not considered aggressive, is not considered rude. And it also allows me to have that conversation with people like, hey, sometimes it's really hard for me to watch the face because when I watch your face, I get super distracted and then I lose complete control over what I'm thinking. So I might stare over your shoulder. So setting up these foundational steps, I think, is critical, which is what we will go more into once we start discussing the Mollis project in this lovely presentation.
Yes. So, as a group, we have the culture and we have the power to shift workplace norms away from accepting uncivil behavior. We can call out bad behavior, we can intervene, we can seek out training, we can reward empathy, we can implement and enforce policy, and we can be aware of our own power. So in the example in the chat of someone who doesn't seem to be aware of their harm, that may not be a place where a group of people can walk into that person's office and be like, you're really scary and you need to fix it, right? Like it's pretty well established, I believe, in this context that like that person's not going to hear it. So instead, what you might do is be like, hey, maybe you reward empathy when you see that exhibited. You say, hey, there's this power dynamic that you're not aware of that makes it like, I know you want to be friendly, but like this power situation makes it so like it's a little intimidating and I know you don't mean to be. Let's brainstorm together. And so I'm not saying you always should curtail criticism or like edit your approach. But if it is somebody who truly does not know that they are a problem, um, you got to kind of get creative with how you send that message. Otherwise, you're going to need to get a supervisor to have that conversation, which can be weird if you've got a very flat organizational structure. So there is not a one size fits all solution. Golly, I wish that there were. But everything is going to have to be adapted to your local workplace. Shared language, norms, educations, conversations, you have to be based on your history, what's happening now, and the individuals you have in the organization to make it effective. And it needs to be an ongoing conversation because those things are living, breathing situation. Like they change over time. But we've said this a couple times and everybody hates it, including us. If the push to stop bullying is not coming from your administrators, your super higher up, HR or whoever, it's going to be limited in effectiveness because enforcement stops at a certain point. So building coalition within your department, within your immediate working group is key if there is not that administrative support. Having conversations with your teams, with your peers, with your working groups to just say, like, hey, we're really jiving, but let's set some norms for our meetings. Let's set some like behavioral standards. That way, when we grow as an organization, we've got something to refer back to, right? Like starting at the lowest level of control and community building we have is how we kind of get it to snowball when we don't always have the buy-in of our library leaders. So that takes us to the project we are working on now. We are calling it the Mollusk Project. Because mollusks tend to have hard outer shells that protect their soft internal layers. And aren't we all just really big squish balls? Even if we try to come off as stern shushing librarians sometimes. We are seeking out to provide this asynchronous educational intervention. And we're doing it asynchronous because we know not every library is going to be on board with doing it with their whole staff. We want people to be able to like do it on their time if they need to, and to be able to revisit the material. So right now, we are in the pilot stage because we want this to be an evidence-based intervention. And in this case, evidence means informed by like data that measures effectiveness, not just storytelling. And I know just storytelling makes qualitative data sound really horrible, and it's not. Qualitative data is very important. But with interventional studies, you do sometimes need some numbers to like show that it makes a difference. So we're working to transform libraries to have empathy and civility for our colleagues and not just our patrons. And so it is an online workshop. There are a series of modules that combine skill building, information sharing, and cognitive rehearsal to get us all on the same page. So we mentioned evidence. We did build off the evidence we could find. Rachel mentioned there's really limited, AKA mostly non-existent, evidence on bullying intervention in libraries. The studies that do exist tend to document prevalence or consequence, but not how to like get it to stop. Bullying research in general, which is my area with a specific focus on higher ed, tends to focus on children or students. And there are organizations that study workplace bullying. Intervention methods are generally things your organization has to pay for, or they are put out there without transparency about the success of the intervention or effectiveness. And so we don't really know what works. But in nursing, our nursing colleagues, they love to study themselves. They love an intervention. They have a similar population to us, and they're known to eat their young. And so we based a lot of our process and materials on them. But we do want to note that their studies, like all the other studies, were limited in their inclusion of marginalized populations. So disabled folks like myself, people of color, uh, people who identify as part of the LGBTQIA community. Like, if you aren't like a white lady, you may not be highly represented in these studies, which we're also hoping to change. Stay tuned. We're still in the pilot phase, so we're using a pre-test, post-test model to gather evidence. So participation in the assessments is optional, but it hugely helps us demonstrate if this works, and if not, how do we change it? So the pretest will just ask demographic information and about bullying you might have been experiencing or inadvertently involved in. Then you'll get into the modules. The first module is going to start with definitions. It's going to go a little beyond what we talked about today in terms of creating this shared language. You'll then move into identifying your role in the workplace, exploring different systems relating to bullying and common characteristics. The next module will let you practice. You'll go through fictional scenarios first to identify what category of behavior is happening and then how might intervening work, playing into that cognitive rehearsal space where you get to practice without having somebody scary in front of you. You'll get a chance to reflect. So you'll get some new questions to give you practice and reflect on like how you are reacting when presented with the scenarios to kind of know yourself. And then you'll wrap up with additional guidelines, additional steps on what can be done to move towards a bully-free workplace. We will also provide a library of printable materials, posters, table tent cards, badge cards, things that can be displayed in library workplaces. That way can share this information with your colleagues. We've also recently added, thank you IRB for approval updates, an optional completion certificate. If you're the type who this would be received well in your workplace and you need documentation of professional development, you can put in your name and get a certificate of completion printed to say you've done the pilot version of these modules. And if you completed it before that was available, let me know. And I can generate one for you. Post-testing. So the post-test is going to ask your thoughts on the modules, and it's going to ask some more questions, like the bullying questions to see things like that. And then we will also be emailing a 6-month follow-up post-test to see if things change even further down the line based on the intervention. So next steps. As a profession, we can't make any change that's meaningful if we don't work together. Our leaders are uniquely positioned to make changes and set the tone and norms. So leaders really need to step it up here. But within our own spheres, we can try for small scale change. For the Mollusk project, our pilot version for the academic modules will remain open until September. We're going to analyze those results and anticipate launching a second pilot with adjustments to try to make it more effective after that. And like Rachel said, we are working on developing modules for other types of libraries and unique population groups within the libraries. But big takeaways, okay? We should be working towards a culture of kindness and respect. We can promote empathy towards victims and begin a practice of bystander intervention to start changing stuff. And we can formalize and enforce anti-bullying policies to start moving the needle towards a more civil workspace. So yeah, you can learn more about our research and follow the project at the Mollusk Project website. To answer some of the questions I see in the chat, also don't hesitate to email Rachel and I with more questions. So yeah, it's designed for people in a library setting, but if you are gonna go into libraries one day or think it would be beneficial or just want to learn from it, go for it. We are not being no, nobody else can use this bullying, and no, just know that it was designed for that. The total time commitment of the project, including the interventions, I wouldn't say more than 2 or 3 hours. If you're really clicking slow through them, and you can split it up. You don't have to do them all at once. You can do one module at a time, and each module maybe 10, maybe 20 minutes for one of the longer ones. But we designed it to not take up your whole life.
Our goal is to sort
yeah.
of make it similar to if you brought in someone for a training, what that would look like. And as Maggie had mentioned, and I've mentioned before as well, we do eventually want to develop specific modules for specific groups, particularly for leadership, because unfortunately they have a lot of power in this situation.
So in the Q&A, during the pilot phase, you can share it as widely if you want, colleagues, orgs, whatever. On the website, there are instructions if somebody in library leadership wants to make it a library-wide professional development training, some just guidelines for them to consider and some options. What if some of the admin in your workplace are bullies? Yeah, that's a common question we get a lot because it is a common occurrence in libraries, unfortunately. So yeah,
So
Rachel, go for it.
that depends on how you want to address the situation, in my experience. If you feel up to it, you can try to utilize the tools provided to you in your particular workplace situation to identify that person as someone who might be violating appropriate workplace laws based on your institution. In which case, the key is documentation, 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 and always remember to CC a non-work email for any of this documentation. I'd also recommend that you should consider what the risks are to yourself, because if it's someone who's above you, if you can't get buy-in, then it's very unlikely that the behavior will stop unless they are forced to. There is also something to be said for soft power. There's not a lot of research around this because it's a little hard to measure. Um, but particularly in our world, we are kind of small, right? Like if you have a colleague who was promoted who is an issue, there might be someone who they listen to, whether that be at your institution or maybe another, where you can try to get an idea from them if there's something that might help you work with that person. An example from my personal experience might be that one of the people who have managerial responsibilities at one of my jobs had a unique communication style. So it was very difficult to have conversations with this person, but we also knew that this person had a best friend who was also a librarian at a different institution. So we could, develop a relationship with that person to try to help us understand better ways to communicate. So like if me and Maggie can talk all the time and we have this great working relationship, but y'all find me really hard to talk to, understanding from Maggie how to have a conversation with me works. And I also understand that might be an awkward conversation. I am very blunt and have no problem being like, yo, Maggie, I don't understand how to work with Jane X. How do you do it? Or perhaps more politely, Maggie, I'd really appreciate your insight into how I might have a conversation with Jane X where she actually hears me. I know that you two have a really good relationship, and do you have suggestions on how I might discuss things in a way that would help her understand what I'm saying, or that will allow me to discuss XYZ in a manner that she might better understand? So there's a lot of different ways to approach it. Again, we are more evidence based, so unfortunately, there is not evidence on this. But that is an option for future research.
Yet. There's not evidence yet. Yeah. Um, to someone, I did answer in the typed bit, but somebody asked if we're open to collaborators or new people joining the project. Shoot us an email if you want to be involved, you have an idea, you just want to chat about ways this could work. Let us know. We are two humans. We need more than two humans doing this work. So please, if you want to get involved, shoot us an email. And then somebody's asked, in our experience, what are some effective ways to enforce appropriate behavior and to stop bullying behaviors? Um, there's so many options, and it's going to depend on how receptive and like aware of situations people are. So there's the classic that I love is to be a little over the top about rewarding good behavior. When I work with groups of colleagues that like can sometimes get unruly in a meeting, I will literally show up with a sheet of gold star stickers. And when somebody's being like an exemplary colleague, I will make a point of giving them a gold star. And I'll be like, you get a gold star for leading us back to the agenda topic. Or like, you get a gold star for like supporting so and so's idea. It is like a preschool tactic. Adults still love gold star stickers. Turns out we're all just giant children. Um, so that's one method I use, but I also give off like kindergarten teacher vibes just in my life in general. So that works for me. When I do it, people aren't like, she's being a real patronizing jerk. They're like, oh, that's Maggie and her stickers again. Um, but calling out bad behavior can
Mhm.
also be pulling somebody aside one-on-one if you think you can have like a metered conversation and just being like, hey, that wasn't cool. I don't think you mean to be this person, but like here's what effect that had. Um,
That's
so yeah.
also where having those established rules and norms can be very helpful because, again, we're all human, we're all going to have a bad day. But when we can say to someone, I really appreciate what you were saying, but the way in which you say it maybe doesn't aligned with our established rules and norms. Could you please consider other ways to do this? I'm happy to practice with you. I'm happy to brainstorm with you. And it also depends, of course, on the relationship between you and the person. So for me, I'm not a manager anymore. Yay! So I can approach it more as a colleague.
Well, this has been a jam-packed presentation. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing your expertise with us today. I would also like to thank Alois Sharp, as well as everyone in the ACRL office who always help make the magic happen for these presentations. Remember that we will send the link to the recording and other supplemental documents for this session when it is available. A reminder to please fill out our brief evaluation, a link to which has been posted in the chat window. I'll post it a few times here. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you. It was lovely. Thank you, everyone, for your participation and your questions. We appreciate you.
Don't be strangers if there's follow-ups.